Yeah. Yeah. If I start to mumble, tell me about it, and I'll pick up the mic and we'll
turn it on.
Yeah. Okay. How many people out here just love their computer? I thought so. How many people love their computer? I'm wasting time here to get the computer booted up. And I think we have.
And we'll cut the lights down, Rob, right? You want the lights
Yeah,
down?
we'll let the crowd decide what we're going to do. And so I'm wasting time because the computer has to boot up, the projector has to start up, then we have to, you know, mess around and all that. And we'll sort through all that and hopefully get a program started. Let me start because one thing is I think we got to thank some people for this event happening. And of course, Kathy Rogers and the Piedmont Arts Center put all this together. It's awesome. I couldn't imagine what we were going to have here tonight. So let me log myself. And of course, Julie Work here has just done a fantastic job of making all this happen. And Mike Davis, who was, you know, maybe my second contact on this story, and Mike and I have spawned a fabulous friendship over this whole project. And yes, there he is, Mike.
Bye-bye.
And Ron, of course, who informed a lot of this process and is going to tell you some cool stuff, sort of derivative of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Well, that's a pretty picture. Let's see if I can log into this thing.
I'll read your password.
Yes, right. And my nephews, Matt and Jeff, are over there. They are my sister Eleanor's sons. And Matt came in with a T-shirt that read, "My password is the last 8 digits of pi."
Not so secure.
I can tell you this, as a guy who's been in the software industry and 50 years now, I can tell you that computers are equal opportunity frustrators. They frustrate the beginner and the expert alike, and everyone in between. So that's an apology for all the things I'm going to mess up here tonight. So here we are. Let's see if we can do this. There. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's see how this works. My goodness, who's that? This is got to thank Mike Davis for this. He sent me a link to a video taken in Martinsville, which many of you probably have watched. It's a silent film, but just showing the ins and outs of Martinsville. It was taken around 1938, which is an interesting year because that's the year that Mike ordered his first big telescope. We don't know how many telescopes Mike had before then, but this was, let's say, maybe the first one you couldn't buy in the Sears catalog, you know, something like that. So anyway, I think we had to open with that, and particularly a picture of the date, so you can sort of picture the man who ordered a telescope from a company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And but really the story, in a sense, starts in 1930. We don't know why Mike got interested in astronomy. I wish I did, but it might have happened around 1930 because there are two significant events that happened then. And if you look up Wikipedia 1930 in science, there were two things listed there. One we are pretty familiar with, which was the discovery of Pluto. And I know last year we got a lot of stories about finally visiting Pluto with a spacecraft and seeing these pictures, which sort of brought life to it. The second thing that happened in 1930 was that Mike I shouldn't say Mike, I say that the telescope that he first bought, his first big telescope that he built a building on these property to view with, was invented. And it's the first major invention in 250 years of building telescopes. I mean, Isaac Newton. So this is a guy named Bernhard Schmidt invented this telescope, which was both a telescope and a camera built into one. And it was a revolutionary invention. And I think all the press about discovering Pluto in 1930 and Mike's eventual discovery of this new kind of telescope. And it took some years for that telescope to actually get into manufacturing, but a company in Pittsburgh started to manufacture them, and Mike obviously knew enough about astronomy to want the newest and greatest telescope available. And so that kind of telescope is called a Schmidt camera, after Bernhard Schmidt, who invented it. And Mike ordered it in, I think, 1938, 39. We don't know exactly when. It took 18 months to build. And he had it by 1940, so he had some time to build the observatory to put it in. And it was absolutely unheard of that an amateur astronomer would buy a telescope of this, of this magnitude. And this Schmidt camera that he bought took some various pictures. I only saw one picture taken by the Schmidt camera, and it happened when I was 8 years old. My dad got this tube in the mail with a photograph. It was poster-sized photograph of the moon taken by this telescope. And so I knew that my uncle had this great telescope. My dad was very proud that his big brother had done this. But so that was his first telescope. And he then, probably, we don't know exactly the time scale on this, but we think that he had the telescope for around 10 or 11 years. And then, like anybody here buy a boat and decide after they've had fun with their boat, they got to buy a bigger boat? This is what happened. He said, "Oh, that was nice. I want a bigger telescope." So he went and bought, same deal, he figured out what he wanted. He went to the same company and ordered a telescope, a bigger telescope. The first one was, and I don't want to bore you with numbers and statistics, but the first one was known as a 16-inch Schmidt camera, and that was the diameter of the mirror inside of it. And of course, would Mike Schottland have bought a telescope there are different kinds of telescopes, but by golly, he was going to have one with a mirror in it, of course. Why wouldn't you? So, that's the business he's in. So, so the second telescope had also a mirror, twice as big as the first one, 32 inches.
Oh, wow.
What's that?
I said, oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, this was a lot of fun to research. When you buy your second boat, you got to sell your first boat. Well, Mike was a philanthropist, not going to sell that mirror. He's going to donate it. He donated it to Perkins Observatory in Delaware, Ohio. That's part of Ohio Wesleyan. And that telescope went there. Ohio Wesleyan built a dome for it, put it in there. They had their own other telescope that they had. And then Mike got his bigger telescope. Ron's going to tell you a little bit about that, but I can tell you that it ultimately was Mike's last telescope because he developed macular degeneration. What a tragedy for this to happen. But Mike then sent the second telescope to Perkins Observatory, where it lives today. So the second telescope is the Schottland. Ron's going to tell you more about that one. Meanwhile, the first telescope is at Perkins Observatory. Let me show you what that looks like. This is the ad from Sky and Telescope for that first telescope. Now, that looks like something you could put on your coffee table, doesn't it? No, it's not. That tube is 8 feet long. And so this was this was the ad for that first telescope. Sadly, after it got to Perkins, it was neglected. For 40 years, it was completely neglected and unused, and it's sad, you know, it's a sad scene there. That stains on the floor are water dripping through the roof, all kinds of nonsense. It's a sad, sorry telescope that we see here. And for 40 years, it laid unused, unloved, whatever. And so the question is, was this really any good, or is this just something you cast off and forget about? It came with drawings, and the reason is that a telescope of this size isn't made like on an assembly line. It's made custom. And it's actually, this drawing only works at the same latitude as Martinsville, Virginia. So, yes. That shape there and that drawing was custom made because it had to work in Martinsville. And and one of those drawings, this I discovered about a week ago, and I'll tell you more about the thing, but in the margin of one of the two drawings that came with the telescope was in the margin, M.R. Schottland, Martinsville, Virginia. So that was a thrill for me to see that. And that was one drawing. The other drawing had the place where the latitude and exact latitude of Martinsville, Virginia was. This telescope belonged to this town, if you will. Anyway, the telescope, as I said, laid unloved and virtually out of sight for years, and 40 years, and NASA around in the late 60s, 70s was starting to get concerned about asteroids impacting the Earth. It does happen, and we see them, we see meteor showers and such, but sometimes a big one hits. Tunguska in 1908, Chelyabinsk, and Ron can pronounce that better than I can. There's another one that happened recently, and NASA and others were starting to be concerned that we on this planet start watching for these and learn how to protect ourselves. I mean, first you have to know that there's something out there that can get you, and then you got to work out how you're going to stay away from it. So there was, I've highlighted two names, you won't read them here, but two names of people who were involved with Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, near where I live. I live in Sedona, Arizona, 28 miles from Flagstaff. And these two people were on a committee, a NASA committee, to start discovering where these nasty rocks were coming from. And their mission was to find every asteroid near the Earth, and there's a kind of a definition for that. It doesn't mean that they're all going to crash into us, but things that we ought to be keeping our eye on that are at least 1 kilometer in size, which is, any of those can cause mass extinctions, more than just the odd tidal wave. They're nasty and they're big. And so they wrote a paper that said we need to find out what it will take for us to find all, say, 1,000 objects that are bigger than a kilometer. And to do that, they had decided that it would take a 6 2.5 meter telescopes to operate for a decade to find these. A 2.5 meter telescope is a big, big telescope. Much bigger than, for example, the ones that Mike Schottland owned. But one of those two people that I highlight there was a fellow by the name of Gene Shoemaker. If the name Shoemaker might ring a bell, a few years ago, there was a comet that crashed into Jupiter. and it was a trail of fragments that crashed in. There's a great photographs of it. That comet was named Shoemaker-Levy 9, and that got people's attention too, because it crashed into Jupiter. If it had crashed into the Earth, we wouldn't be here talking tonight. So they wanted 6 2.5-meter telescopes. That's what they said the Congress should approve or get other countries to fund to build. That was considered too extravagant, too much money. Fortunately, Gene Shoemaker had worked at the Palomar Observatory, and he knew that it could be done with less. He was outvoted, but he knew, because he worked with a telescope the same size as Mike Schottland's first telescope at Palomar, and he knew this was a superb telescope. And it's been proven to be a superb telescope in many respects. And I'm back to this photograph. You remember the sad, telescope. The folks at Lowell Observatory sent their chief engineer to Delaware, Ohio, where Ohio Wesleyan decided to sell the telescope to them. They needed it, and they had a plan. The plan was, forget the 2.5-meter telescope. Lowell will be one of these telescopes, but it'll be the telescope we choose. And they took that sad, neglected telescope from Delaware, Ohio, brought it to Lowell Observatory, and started working on it. First, it was a telescope built in 1939. It didn't know about computers. It didn't know about digital cameras. And they knew this project was going to require both. So he took this telescope and turned it into that telescope. This is Mike's original 16-inch Schmidt camera. The folks at Lowell looked at it and said, oh, this can be a 24-inch telescope. All we got to do is change one piece of glass in it. And then they started computerizing it and putting digital electronics in it and making it controllable from a set of computers. And just to give you a scale on this, I told you it wouldn't fit on a coffee table. That's me standing in front of the camera. That's Betty's, my wife's photograph. And we went up, this is a picture taken last week. And the telescope is in between jobs right now. It spent 11 years looking for asteroids, and it did a superb job of that. And I'll give you some statistics about that just to give you a feel. This telescope has discovered more objects and is credited with this, discovering more objects than you can imagine. Here's where it lives today. This is Anderson Mesa near Flagstaff. Nice place to visit, isn't it? Beautiful scenery. So that circled dome is where it lives today. In its mission to discover near-Earth asteroids, it was known as Lonios. And if you go to any professional astronomer anywhere in the world and say, have you heard of Lonios? They will laugh and say, of course we've heard of it. Here's a picture of the dome at night by its new proprietor, gentleman Dan Abner, young fellow in grad school at Northern Arizona University. And nice picture of the Milky Way, so it's got kind of that appeal. And then, of course, you see just the nose of the telescope in the dome there. Here's the control room for Lonios. And the man sitting there is Brian Skiff. If you go to any astronomer in the world and ask them if they know who Brian Skiff is, they will laugh. Brian is the, I would say he's the successor to Clyde Tombaugh Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto in 1930. And Brian knew him, and Brian is much highly respected astronomer. I, of course, wanted to talk to Brian about Lonios and other things he did, and we were over to Anderson Mesa, and Brian was over there, and I started to talk to him, and for some reason we went 20 minutes, and we realized we'd spent 20 minutes talking about Haydn string quartets. Go figure. I fortunately have had time to talk to Ryan about matters telescopic, and I can tell you he has no peers in the business. So. Oh, let's back up. So here's just a brief list, of its accomplishments, but let me give you the big number. Lonios discovered 20,480 asteroids. Now, relax, that's not how many are close and are going to crash into us. But the number that were considered, now this list, and I'm not going to keep it up to read it, but I can tell you that 59 of those are in a category called potentially hazardous asteroids. That is, an asteroid that might somehow crash into the Earth. Those are the ones we're interested in. There are a bunch of others, and they fall into other categories, but of those 289 are known as near-Earth asteroids. Now, what's my part in this, and how did this all come about? I was touring Lowell Observatory, and they got interested in what I might be able to contribute to one of their projects, got to know the folks there, and these people like Brian Skiff and Ralph Nye, who's the one who did that wonderful upgrade to the telescope and all that. And I realized they didn't know that Lonios was Mike Schottland's. He's the first person who paid real money for the telescope. The rest of them got it through a hand-me-down process. And so they were thrilled that this was owned by an amateur astronomer. After all, Percival Lowell, who started that observatory, was an amateur astronomer. So was Hiram Perkins at Ohio Wesleyan, started that institution. So they were very comfortable with that and were thrilled to know that Lonios had been owned by an amateur and bought and paid for, and all that. So the first thing they said to me is, Rob, we need to name an asteroid after your uncle. So so how do you name an asteroid? Well, first of all, there are rules, and they're good rules as far as I'm concerned. First of all, if there's any danger of it crashing in the Earth, onto the Earth, Now, we can all think of a person you'd like to name an asteroid after, but we'll leave that till after the political season is concluded. But at any rate, so what happened was, by now I kind of knew the story, and I kind of had figured out what had happened. So I got in touch with Julie, who then told me to get in touch with Mike Davis, and that maybe we could work on this. And so we were given then guidelines on what the citation should be for the naming. And also we learned from Larry an astronomer at Lowell Observatory, that he was the guy who submits names. You submit a name, it goes to the IAU, and a committee looks at the names and all that, and they make sure the asteroid that's going to be named is okay and is not going to, etc. And so they chose an asteroid that was far from Earth. In fact, this asteroid is no danger to mankind. So So here was the citation. And this courtesy of Mike Davis. He sent it to me. And I said, well, this is perfect. Let's just use it. There was a limited amount of text you could have and all that. I'll read it to you so people don't have to squint here. It says 25940, that's the number of the asteroid. When an asteroid is discovered, when they are absolutely certain they could find it reliably at any time in the future, they will number it. So that's the first thing that happens. Yeah, so the next thing is you give it a name, and they have to approve of the name, and that was approved. And then there's an equal sign there, and it says 2001 ET5. I sort of like that extraterrestrial connection. But honestly, that's a systematic code that's given to a new object when it's first discovered, before they've decided anything about it. And so that stays with it for all time. And the 25940 is the number. No other asteroid has that number. Although we know that that it happens that Steven Spielberg has an asteroid named after him. It's only a few numbers below that. And Douglas Adams, who wrote the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he has an asteroid also very near this number. Just to let you know, what do you figure the highest numbered asteroid is today? It's about 445,000. So Larry Wasserman at Lowell told me, says, we're going to find a nice low number for your uncle. So it is a very prestigious number. And to give you another statistic, an unfair statistic, is you're probably all aware that Pluto was demoted from a planet to a dwarf planet. A kind of a meaningless distinction except from funding purposes. But Pluto, when Pluto was demoted, it was given a number because it now became an asteroid. In essence, an asteroid, a big one, the biggest one, I think. And its number is 134340. So Mike Schottland got a lower numbered asteroid than Pluto. Go figure. Okay, where is this asteroid? You all want to know, right? Here's Jupiter, and here's Mars, and Mike Schottland is out there in between. It's called an MBA, not a Masters of Business Administration, a main belt asteroid. And there is this sort of area between Mars and Jupiter where some people think there was a planet that sort of crumbled or something and became nothing, but I think that scientists aren't really, we have better dynamic feel for what this area is, but it's sort of a bunch of asteroids out there. They're no dangerous to us now, at least not for the foreseeable future. So it sits out there harmless, but nonetheless it's our asteroid, isn't it? I've dated this. Of course, all this stuff is moving around, isn't it? So I got the photo. Got this diagram based on tonight. So tonight, this is where Mike Schottland is. By the way, all these objects in this photo are going counterclockwise. So tomorrow it's a little further around, Earth is a little further around, etc. So this is, and there's distances here and all this that this asteroid is basically 2.6 times as far from the sun as Earth. Something we call an astronomical unit, which is our distance from the sun is 1, and this 2.6 is in that unit. So that wasn't enough for me. Show me the asteroid, right? I got an email from Nick Moskowitz, one of the staff astronomers at Lowell Observatory, and their self-proclaimed guru on asteroids. And he said, and by this time I was working with Nick because they needed my help on a project, and I'm still going to be on that project for a while. And Nick says, hey, it's July 21st. Would you like to pop up to the DCT, which is Lowell's largest telescope? It's called the Discovery Channel Telescope because they got, I think, $4 million from the Discovery Channel to fund this. This is a 4.3 meter telescope, a little bigger than Mike's Schmidt camera, but a telescope that is brand new, I mean, a few years old. And Nick said, come on up, and I need, you come up and spend a night at the telescope, and I'll put you to work, and we'll have this. So, and they even have a lodge there, so, because if you spend a night looking through a telescope in the middle of nowhere, they have a lodge so you can, when you're done, you don't have to get on the roads bleary-eyed and, kill yourself. So this is the inside of that building, and this is what we call the instrumentation bay. And I just wanted you to see, and you can't see the mirror of the telescope. It's like at eye level, so you can't see anything. But you can see the secondary mirror right here. And it's a big mirror, bigger than Mike Schottland's mirror, and it's only the secondary for this telescope. This is an enormous telescope. 5th largest telescope in the continental United States. Anyway, so you kind of go in before it's dark and you set up all the instruments the way you want them, and then you leave this area. Because this is a telescope. It does have a place you could put an eyepiece, but nobody does that. We're in the era of photography and digital, stuff, and so we don't do that anymore, but it's there. And so Mike, Nick Moskovitz, I should say, said, Rob, we're going to calibrate the Devaney spectrometer tonight. I said, the what? And he says, yeah, it's easy, no problem. So he gives me this ladder, and I climb up the ladder in the instrumentation bay. He says, just see that knob over there? Turn it until this number shows up, and he's looking at things and all that. And we're finally done with that, and we go into the control room. You're seeing about 2/3 of the computer screens that are in this control room. Everything about the telescope happens from this room. So remember the one where Brian Skiff was in that room with about 4 screens. There are like 14 in this room. And this is where you spend your night. They even have a little, coffee maker and refrigerator to put your sandwich because you're going to spend the night there. Fortunately, July 21st is the longest day of the year. Therefore, it's the shortest night of the year. So Nick, gets and he says, okay, let's look at the list of what we're going to observe tonight. Well, we're going to look at some trans-Neptunian objects here for Audrey, and what do I have here? Mike Schottland. So Nick, of course, I suspected this, set me up so that we could view Mike Schottland from the Discovery Channel telescope because the name had been approved in June, and this was July, so we were going to make the first post-naming observations. And so Nick called up the computer screens for the Discovery Channel telescope. He says, look, I'll read you the numbers. You type these in because I want you to do it. They had me also log in as an observer so that Rob Schottland could be the first post-naming observer. I mean, what a great honor. And so we did that. And if you look, there's a white blob.
Yeah.
That's the asteroid. Now, where the asteroid was at this time, you needed this telescope to do it. I'd like to say that we went over to Lonios or whatever and looked at it, but that didn't happen. It was at the Discovery Channel telescope. But it was a big thrill. I mean, who non-astronomer gets to go to a big place like this and do this? So I was utterly thrilled. So anyway, just to tell you, so we haven't talked about the future of this telescope. I'll just give you just a couple bits on that. Did its job, discovering 20,240 asteroids and many And 42 comets, by the way. How many of us have, I mean, I've only seen maybe 2 comets in my own life, and this telescope is credited with the discovery of 42. This is Mike Schottland's Schmidt camera. So what's going to happen? The telescope is being refitted, because 10 years have gone by, technology has moved on, and so they have new optics for it, new digital optics, bigger everything, and they have made it a state-of-the-art instrument, and it's going to be doing a new mission involving robotic operations. So it'll still have a control room, but it'll be able to operate autonomously without a human. And the idea is that when some other telescope in the world finds something that's happening, and a lot of discoveries, they send basically bulletins to each other, say, we see something special that needs to be looked at. Then every available telescope is turned to that object. The new telescope, I mentioned this name, Lonios. The new name is FROST, which I couldn't tell you what the acronym, but I know it's robotic observation. It can open its dome, turn the telescope, take images, and ship them on the internet to an organization that wants this. So it means that we now are in the team business of astronomy. We find something, we put other telescopes on it immediately, so we have multiple pictures and all that. So this telescope is alive and well, and hopefully at least another decade or more of service to the scientific community. So with that, I want to thank you all for your patience. I hope you're as excited as I am about what Mike Schottland has brought to the world of science.
All right, thank you.